Welcome back to the Middle of Culture. I'm one of your hosts, Eden.
And I'm your other host, Peter.
Hey, Peter, how you been?
I have been all right. Just, doing the things, doing the work, and mostly work.
You said you were trying to stay positive.
I am. I'm trying to be a little more positive at work. And it's funny. I will be honest and admit that it initially was all a ruse. It was a fake. It was me just putting on a show. But I'm actually kind of now going, no, I'm feeling, I'm feeling more positive. That's a good thing. So
there you go.
It could be worse. But what about you? How are you?
I'm trying to keep myself busy. We are, busy at work. We're in the swing of things. We're past that big push at the start of the semester, so it's a little more calm now. Prepping for a bunch of events coming up later this semester, but that's kind of where I'm at. Kind of what I've been up to.
Well, there you go. We had a swim meet yesterday in Twin Falls, and I planned poorly. Last week, I don't know what the weather's been like for you guys, but for us last week, it was really nice. It started to cool off. We had a couple of days in the high 50s to low 60s, which personally, I'm all over that. I like it. I like fall. I wish we had a little more of it. And then it started to get warm again, and we went over to Twin Falls yesterday for a swim meet that started at 3:15, and I was timing the second half from 5:15 until the meet was done, and I didn't think about it. And next thing I know, for 2 hours, I'm standing at the east end of the swimming pool with the sun slowly going down in the west, but blasting me right in the face, reflecting off the water for 2.5 hours. And It was 82 degrees yesterday. And so by the time that was done, I'm like, boy, I'm sunburned and I don't feel great. But that was poor planning on my part.
Yeah, today was kind of warm, and this whole next week we're going to be in the mid to upper 80s until next Saturday. Oof. I'm not excited about it.
Yeah, today it's 82, 83, but it is supposed to be a little cooler tomorrow, then drop back down into the 60s for the second half of this week. So I'm hoping that such will be the case, and I'm looking forward to that.
I'm very jealous. We're barely getting 60s at night by the end of the week. So
yeah, that's
rough
gross.
Out here. It's rough out here. Anyway, what you been up to? What you been checking out? What you been listening to, reading, watching? Anything fun?
Yeah, so not a lot for me to go over, but a few things to kind of circle back around, and then a couple new things. In games, I'm still doing Diablo 4, still cruising along. I think I am hitting a point where the meta of the game becomes more important, and so I'm starting to lose my interest a little bit. I can still cruise through and destroy things incredibly quickly with this rogue build that I have. I did go through the Capstone Dungeon, unlocked World Tier 4, Torment, fired it up and jumped into it, and then was going to go do a few dungeons to try and, level up some of my glyphs in my Paragon board. And again, this is getting into all the silly parts of Diablo that don't interest me that much, and then realized that all of these dungeon keys, these sigils that I had, were only good for Nightmare world level and not Torment. So I dropped back to Nightmare, and we'll see if I continue to do dungeons. I don't know. We'll see. I'm kind of getting ready to take another break from Diablo, and I may bounce off or just kind of put it on pause. The expansion with the new character class and stuff comes out in a few weeks, I think early October. So I think I may be wrapping up my time with Diablo 4 until that new content gets added. But one thing I was excited about, haven't really had time to put any playtime into it, but Age of Mythology Retold was released. I don't know, did you ever really get into Age of Mythology, Eden?
I played it a little bit, when it first came out, but not a ton.
Okay. I loved it. I loved Age of Empires 2. I loved Age of Mythology, so I was very excited for Age of Mythology Retold. I did fire it up and did one little of the, kind of intro, maybe tutorial missions or whatever. And it looks good. It plays like Age of Mythology. The reviews from users have been all really positive. And so excited to jump into that at some point because that is a game that I like quite a bit. But that's really it on the gaming front. Again, to my shame, I still have not finished Cyberpunk. Part of it's because like Diablo was one of those games where even if I only have a few minutes, I mean, it only takes, 10, 15 minutes to do one of these dungeons, if that. And so I can play it in small chunks. And that's mostly what I've had time for lately. Cyberpunk, not a great game for small chunk gaming like that. It really, I think is better when I can sit down and devote a good chunk of time to it. So, we'll get back to it one of these days and finish it off. But books wise, I finally did finish that book, Duskwalker, that I talked about a couple of weeks ago. I enjoyed it enough, but again, it just, it's one of those, I sit there reading it and I'm kind of like, I don't know that I think I'm a great writer, but I read some of this stuff and I'm like, well, I could have said that better than this. So if anything, perhaps it increased my optimism in my own writing abilities. We'll put it that way. How does that sound? But what I did do, as soon as I finished it, I did restart the first Mistborn book, Mistborn, The Final Empire. And I will say there's a reason that Brandon Sanderson currently is my favorite author. And going back into Mistborn just kind of felt like sitting in front of a fire with a nice fuzzy blanket and a cup of something warm. And I mostly say that because even though I don't like a cup of something warm, I know most people do. And just cozying up to the fire, it kind of felt like coming home. So that's been fun. And rereading it, having because this is my first time going back to the Mistborn series and rereading it now, knowing what I know and having read through it and knowing how this world interconnects with other worlds in the Cosmere, it's been a lot of fun because there's a lot of things in there that I just did not catch at all the first time. That right from the get go, I'm like, okay, all right, I see where you're planting these seeds that will develop later on. So that's been a lot of fun. Final thing, I'll talk about some music real quick because that's just one of the things I do. I do have a question for you, Eden. Have you listened to Floods of Triton? No. It is a new single. It's good. You should go check it out. It is a new single that was released on Friday. It is a collaborative single between Mastodon and Lamb of God. And it's a lot of fun. There are moments where I'm listening to it and I'm like, okay, there's mostly the Lamb of God influences, and then it will segue into another part. And I'm like, and this now sounds more like Mastodon. And so it's kind of a fun, you can hear the identities of the two bands in it. And that was good. I talked a couple weeks ago about my excitement for the new album, An Empire by A Swarm of the Sun, the official album released about a week and a half ago. Nice. And I will say, I think it's great. I think it's excellent. But I will also say it is definitely the most, I don't want to use the word impenetrable, but it's the word that comes to mind. It is so far the most impenetrable of all of A Swarm of the Sun's albums. Their previous album, The Woods, was a difficult one really because it's 3 songs, each about 13 minutes long. So they're kind of slow burns. But this is a long album, maybe a little too long. It's up in like the 70 plus minute range. A number of long tracks, a lot of them that do have a real slow kind of gradual build. It is very much a post-rock kind of post-metal album in that regards. But I like it a lot, but definitely would not be one if somebody was like, hey, what about these Swedes? I would not direct them to this album first. This would be probably actually the last of their 4 albums that I would recommend. I'd be like, start with one of these, and then go to this one, then this one, and then if you're really feeling it, then go to An Empire. But I dig it. And then the final thing I will mention is, have you ever heard of the band Oceans of Slumber?
No, I have not.
So Oceans of Slumber is a Texas band, and their very first album, I believe, and I'm just going off the top of my head, I believe it's called like Ethereal or Etherean or something like that. It was kind of a progressive metal, death metal, like elements of Opeth, but a little bit more progressive, a little bit more. Anyway, it's an interesting album, but it wasn't the first album that turned me on to these guys. The first album was that I heard was their second album, Winter. And you can hear elements of the same band in there, but from Winter on, they feel like very different bands because they had a new lead singer. And their lead vocalist, Cami Gilbert, I think officially now it's Cami Beverly. She and the drummer, Dober Beverly, got married at some point. But since that time, Cami Gilbert has a very rich, very soulful voice, and she's an awesome singer. And so they changed their sound to, I think, more incorporate her singing than the style of the guys who had been doing it on their first album. Winter is a good album. Winter is like half of an incredible album and the other half of an okay album. And then the one that came after that, The Banished Heart, is a good album, if a little difficult to listen to at times, just because it is so emotionally harrowing. The main songwriter was going through a divorce and a lot of family issues at the time, and those issues that he was dealing with personally come through in the music very much. And so I think it's a good album. It's a little heavy to get through all at once. The one that came out after that was probably my personal favorite of theirs up to that point. And then a few years ago, they released one called Starlight and Ash. And despite how much I like the band, I could not listen to all of Starlight and Ash. It was a lot more mellow, a lot more kind of, I don't want to say emo, but it almost felt emo, like emo rock kind of stuff. Just didn't do much for me. And so I was a little trepidatious about their upcoming album because I just didn't know. Was this going to be more like their self-titled or The Banished Heart, or was this going to be another Starlight and Ash? And it is much more like those previous albums, but I think even better and more cohesive. And it feels to me like their newest album, Where Gods Fear to Speak, that just came out, is really the album that they've been working towards over the last decade or so. It feels like the most, again, kind of coherent and cohesive album as a whole that they have released. It definitely feels like the best progression of their sound thus far, and is really a great album. I mean, I will be astonished if it isn't, in my top 10 at the end of the year. Granted, I've only had a few days to listen to it, but I've been listening to it an awful lot since then, and love it. It's great. So good to kind of have these guys back. And again, I know some people who really like Starlight and Ash, and I'm sure that I would find a lot to appreciate. But there's so much music that it was one of those that didn't grab my interest, and so I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna move on. And but this one's grabbed my interest. It's grabbed it, and it's grabbed it hard. So really, really good stuff that I have been enjoying lately. But what about you? What you been up to?
Trying to keep myself busy. I'm going to also start where you left off and talk a little bit about music, some music I've been listening to. I have gone down a really weird hole of like 1970s weird underground music from Japan.
Okay.
So that's a
That
lot of
sounds
what I've been
interesting.
listening to lately. So there is a kind of a fusion jazz group called Cassiopeia. And their self-titled first album, Cassiopeia, is the one I would recommend if anyone is interested in like, oh, this sounds vaguely interesting. It's just like a really cool, really weird kind of jazz funk fusion. That it just does really, really interesting music. And it's really fun to listen to, really like funky and like has a lot of fun bass lines and great keyboarding and all sorts of weird stuff. So Cassiopeia, self-titled album. It's got two cars racing on the front of it, so you'll know that's one you're talking about. Really, really cool. And then the other hole I've followed down is there is a composer whose name is Shigeo Sekito, who did a series of albums from 1975 to 1977 called Special Sounds. So there's 4 volumes of it. Special Sounds volumes 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I don't even know how to describe Shigeo Sekito's music. It's just like weird kind of spacey synthetic synthesizer weirdness. It's extremely cool, extremely great instrumental background music to your life. Have you ever heard of Mort Garson? This is a good poll for Shigeo Sekito.
I have not.
So I know you're not a big podcast. I mean, I don't know if you're like a person who listens to Let's Plays at all. But you might know a single Mort Garson song if you've ever listened to the first season or so of the podcast The Adventure Zone, which I'm not saying everyone should go out and listen to The Adventure Zone. I think it's pretty mid, but I can complain about the McElroys at another point in my life. But the music for that first season of The Adventure Zone is explicitly a song, I think, from the Mort Garson album Plantasia. And is just like really weird and synthesizers and funky and just really cool. And Shigeo Sekito's stuff is very similar to Mort Garson's stuff. And it's just been really fun to listen to.
Nice.
Speaking of podcasts, as long as I'm talking about podcasts, I wasn't going to bring this up, but now it's in my brain. And I often think about it after we've recorded the episode for me to be like, oh, I should talk about that podcast. But they just wrapped up a season, so it's worth talking about. And again, I think we've talked a little bit about it, but I don't know if it's been on pod. I know you listen to a lot of podcasts, but you listen to mostly like tech pods and things like music pods. Is that kind of what you're into?
Yeah, it really is mostly technology and kind of tech adjacent, some sort of pop culture kind of stuff, but yeah, mostly technology kind of stuff.
So you're not like a person who's into Let's Plays or actual play podcasts, like RPG podcasts, things like that.
No, the only actual play podcast I listen to is is Total Party Kill, which is through. It is one of the podcasts on the Incomparable Network. And again, I kind of got to the Incomparable because it's the guy behind it who started it also does some of the tech podcasts I listen to. So that was kind of how I got into it.
Sure. That makes sense. So I used to listen to a bunch of actual play podcasts when they like first were starting to become a thing. I never was a Critical Role person, but I did listen to a lot of Adventure Zone until I realized they're not very good at doing that type of show. And I've tried a lot of different ones like that, but there's really only been one that I've stuck with. And they just wrapped their last season, and it is also their 10-year anniversary just earlier this week. And that is Friends at the Table. Have you ever listened to Friends at the Table or heard anyone talk about Friends at the Table, Peter?
It sounds familiar, but I have not listened to it myself.
So if you listen to video game podcasts from the mid 2010s, you've maybe heard of Austin Walker. He was a video game critic who worked for Giant Bomb for a while and then was part of the trio that started Waypoint over at Vice in like 2016 or so.
Okay. I used to listen to the Bombcast a lot years ago, and
he was a Beastcast person, so I don't
familiar.
know if he probably made some appearances, but he was on the East Coast, so he was on the Giant Beastcast rather than the Bombcast.
I was into that enough. I was into that enough that, and I was listening to the Bombcast when it was just the Bombcast. And then when they created the two, I listened to both for a while. So, Joey, what was his name? What was the guy who was on the Bombcast who was doing the Beastcast? I can't remember now.
Vinny. You're thinking of Vinny.
Vinny. There we go. Vinny.
Caravella.
I knew there was a Vinny Caravella. So, yep. So I recognize the name Austin Walker.
Yeah, so he only worked for Giant Bomb for like a year before he started Waypoint with Patrick Klepek, who had also been on Giant Bomb for years. And so those two, along with Danielle Riendo, started Waypoint. And it was a good video game site that was trapped by being part of Vice, which is one of the most incompetently run digital news sources on the planet. But that's where I heard of Austin Walker, was people talking about the Beastcast and then talking about Waypoint. So I started listening to Waypoint, but he is also almost always the GM for the actual play show Friends at the Table. And the reason why I think, and again, they just wrapped their, I guess this is their 8th season.
Wow.
Yeah, this is their 8th season, their 8th big storyline that they just wrapped up. It is a direct sequel to the 6th one, which are sort of thematic, existing in the same world season sequels to seasons 2 and 4, which are kind of their sci-fi seasons 2, 4, 6, and 8. And then 1, 3, 5 are like fantasy-ish seasons, and then 7 is kind of like a weird West fantasy situation. But anyway, Palisade, which is season 8, just wrapped up. And I can't say enough about how they, as a team of people, understand what makes a good show. Like, it's not one of those ones that's like highly produced with lots of sound effects or anything like that. There's opening music, ending music, and occasionally there'll be mid-episode music when something big is happening. Jack DeKeat, who is one of the members of the cast, also does all the music for it, will write a new song when shit gets particularly, usually bad. It's when there's a new Jack DeKeat track appearing. But this last season was just incredible listening, because it is a sci-fi setting. It's a universe hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of years in the future from now. Humanity has expanded all over the galaxy, and the stakes were just so high throughout the entire season, and they kept getting higher, and yet, like, the roles kept working out. And it was one of those times when, like, and you, as a person who plays RPGs, who plays D&D, knows how this goes sometimes, when sometimes the luck is just with you and your party is able to do things that your GM did not prepare for, number one, and number two,
Oh, yeah.
there's no world where you should have been able to pull this off, but you pulled it off, and you pulled it off with aplomb.
Oh, yeah.
And then sometimes the dice are not with you and shit gets real bad for a while. And this season, I feel like, had the highest of highs and the lowest of lows when it came to the dice rolls. And it made for some of the most nerve-wracking listening. It was so much fun to listen to. And so, again, anyone, if you have ever wanted to dip your toe into an actual play situation, honestly, Friends of the Table is the one I would point you to. And there are a couple intros you could do. You could start, if you like more fantasy stuff, I would start with Marielda, which is kind of like a preview to their season 3 stuff. And then you could go back and listen to the earlier stuff in that setting if you feel like it. But the first season and a half or so, you can tell these were enthusiasts who were not doing it as a job, and their audio quality is not super great.
Sure.
You know how it is. And like, this is not anyone's full-time job, I think, that does this podcast. This is like, they have a Patreon. I subscribe to their Patreon, but like, this is a side thing that they do. And they just tell stories in ways and in scale and scope that none of these other actual play podcasts have the guts to do. And it's incredible to hear them, and they cut so little from it too. Like, I know a lot of them, especially the more produced shows like Critical Role or D20, I respect what they're doing. They're trying to make like radio drama that is influenced by the dice they are rolling. That is how that is more set up. This is people playing a game. And so sometimes you'll have a 15-minute conversation where the party is like, the dice are not with us. Should we make this roll anyway? And like, they will make pros and cons and like talk about what they should do or what they shouldn't do, or alternate ideas of how they could approach the situation. And I find that such an interesting way to approach it, because it's so honest and like upfront of, we are playing a game, and this is how the game's systems work. This is how we are gaming the game, trying to like get the best possible outcome for our characters, because that's what we care about. And And it was a really great season. It ended with a huge bang that is going to have huge repercussions for the sequel season we'll get for season 10. And it's just another place if you want to get in and you want more sci-fi stuff, I would just start with Partisan, which is season 6. There's a whole Road to Partisan series of games you could listen to if you wanted to see them try out different games for like 1 or 2 episodes. But honestly, if you're interested, start with Partisan episode 1, and you'll be introduced to Thisbe, who is the greatest robot in all of media. Maybe I have grown to love this robot so much. She's my favorite character in Friends at the Table, and like is up there with R2D2 for like all-time great robots that I've ever interacted with in media.
That's awesome. That's saying a lot.
That's saying a lot. I'm putting this weird goat robot next to R2D2. So anyway, it's good. If you're interested, give it a listen. Nice. A couple other things I'll mention really quick before we get to the main event. I really just I finished Star Wars Outlaws. And listeners, everyone who says that game is mid is wrong. That game fucking rules.
Really?
I was wrong.
And I'm curious, and I want to hear what you have to say because just the other day, I mean, I think it literally might have been yesterday, I was reading a big Reddit post or somebody who was like, just basically, let me tell you my experience with Star Wars Outlaws. And it was one of those where it was pretty positive in the beginning, and then the more planets they went to and the more they were exploring, they didn't ever get down on it, but they were more like, yeah. And they're like, yeah, I got to this point and don't feel any desire to come back. So please tell me, and before you do this, I have to ask a question.
Yes.
If I want to play this on the PC, where do I have to buy it? Do I have to buy it from Ubisoft?
No, I think that they wisely said, just fucking buy this from Steam.
Okay, because I searched in Steam for Star Wars Outlaws and I couldn't find it.
Did they not? Maybe that was. I'm thinking of EA, how they were like, no, you can just buy Dragon Age on Steam these days. It might be on Epic, which like I don't see. I use Epic Game Store because they give me a game or two every week, and there are other games that I only can get on Epic Game Store. So I use it. I don't like it. I don't want to use it, but it do be looking like it's
go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's an Epic Game Store exclusive at this point.
Yep, it's Ubisoft or Epic Game Store. See, and that just pisses me off because I'm going to be honest and tell you, it's the same reason I haven't bought Alan Wake 2 yet, which is a shame because I hear really good things.
It's very good.
But I also hear a lot of people who are talking about how they really hope that Remedy got their money from Epic for making it an Epic Game Store exclusive because the sales have been down the shitter because it's only been on Epic.
Yeah, I mean, it's not good. Like, I hate Steam, but everything's there. Everything's there.
Yeah.
And, like, you need to get it on. Again, this is why I was just saying EA is not making you even sign into EA Play to play it to play Dragon Age Veilguard through Steam. You just buy it through Steam like a normal game because they're like, we want to decrease all possible friction from people buying and playing this game because good God, do we need a hit? But regardless,
So please tell us about Star Wars Outlaws.
Here's the thing. It all comes down to how much you're willing to give into astonishment. And like Star Wars still has its stupid claws in me. As much as I like to think I'm over it, you tell me a halfway competent Star Wars story that looks like Star Wars and I'm in, dog. Like it just, they nailed the environment. And it looks and feels so much like Star Wars. And that's like, that does so much heavy lifting for me. And I like the main character a lot. I like the team that you build for this heist. It has a big swerve that I kind of predicted and was not super surprised by, but I was really pleased with how it went because I thought it was interesting. And I just found it really compelling. I had a blast with it, and I didn't do a ton of the side content. I did a bunch of the side content, but not a ton of it.
Sure.
But that's because I'm going to now set it on a shelf and wait until all the DLC is out, and then I'm going to play it all the way through again and hit everything. That's my goal.
There you go.
and it was
Cool.
fun. Like,
Good.
and again, like one of the things I liked so much about Andor is that it was a story in the Star Wars universe, but it was not a story about Jedi. It was not a story about Skywalkers. They never said the word Force in 12 episodes of that goddamn show. And you know what? I don't think Outlaws said the word the Force either. They didn't. That's not what this is about. This is about a scummy, like, outlaw doing their thing on the outer rim and jumping from planet to planet and pissing people off while making other people happy, trying to make sure everyone is just happy enough that no one wants to kill her. Like, it just was a really interesting way to build a video game, and I found it delightful. I had a very, very good time with it, and I'm excited to go back once the DLC is out.
Cool. Well, I'll definitely have to check it out. I may wait a little bit until the DLC's out because I have so many games that I need to play.
There's too many games.
There are too many games.
Too many games. But speaking of things that aren't games, that's a segue, listeners.
Speaking of things that aren't games,
we're going to be talking about that movie that I teased last episode. We finally made our way through it, all 166 minutes of it. And we are talking about the 1972 Soviet science fiction film, Solaris. So, Peter, had you heard of this movie before? Had you seen anything about this movie before?
I remembered hearing about the 2002 version with George Clooney.
Mm-hmm.
I did not know there was a 1972 version. And so until you suggested it, I was not aware of this movie.
Okay. Yes. So this is for those who might not know, this is based on a 1962 or 1961 novel, also named Solaris, by the Polish science fiction author Stanislaw Lem. It was made into a Soviet TV film in 1968, and Tarkovsky saw it and was like, oh, this is an interesting idea, but the execution wasn't great. I want to make this movie. So he made a version in 1972. As Peter said, there was an American version of this film directed by Steven Soderbergh and starring George Clooney, which I have never seen, that came out in 2002. And I'd never seen either of these films, but I have seen other Tarkovsky films. I've seen Stalker a number of times. I really think it is an incredible film. It's one of those ones that, like, it casts a very long shadow. That's what I'll say about Stalker. Have you ever seen or heard of Stalker, Peter?
Nope.
So you've heard of the Stalker video games, right?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Well,
I own them all. Never played them.
They're based on this movie Stalker.
Okay.
Are they like the movie Stalker? No, because they are weird first person action. Everything's falling apart and my gun is made from bolts and sticks games. And Stalker is very loosely about the same sort of things, about going into the zone, as it's called, this restricted site where there are weird anomalies and things like that. And that's what Stalker is about. It's based on a novel, Roadside Picnic, which is an incredible novel if you've never read it. Really, really good Soviet sci-fi from 1972, I want to say. Very cool book. And then he also made the movie Nostalgia, which is from 1983, which is just a stunning drama, just like a character piece. But I'd never seen Solaris, and so I was like, you know what I want to do? I want to watch Solaris, but I need an excuse to watch it. So I came up with this idea of making us watch it. It's very long. It's 2 hours and 46 minutes. But Peter, how did you find Solaris?
So here's a little behind the curtain peek for our listeners. We are recording on Sunday evening. Normally, in a perfect world, I would have had this episode edited and posted some point earlier today. Obviously, that didn't happen because we had to push this off to Sunday evening. Part of the reason behind that is because at about 3-something and change, 3:30-ish or so on Thursday, I had finally gotten home from work and made it through a couple other things that I had to do that were appointments that I didn't have control over the timing of those things. And I sent you a text. And I said something to the effect of, going to have to 1.25x this one to get it done in time. And as I mentioned that to you, you responded with, this feels like a movie where speeding it up will ruin the pacing.
Yes.
And so we elected to put this off. Now, Thursday afternoon, I watched some of this, and gratefully, it starts off, and one of the first things after some initial credits, it says Solaris Part 1. And then at about an hour and 10, 20 minutes, somewhere in there, there is something happens in the movie, and then it says Solaris Part 2. And so just because of my schedule, and I knew we were going to be recording later, I hit pause at Solaris Part 2. And then it came around to Sunday, and I'm like, I need to finish this movie. And I thought to myself, having seen Solaris Part 1, if there's one thing I want to do, oh dear God, I want to ruin the pacing of this movie. And so I put it on 1.5 times, and I managed to muscle through the second half of this movie, which is an interesting movie and also quite possibly the most boring thing I've ever suffered through in my life.
Oh, I knew this was going to happen. I knew as I was watching it, I thought to myself, I am having a transcendent experience at the cinema, and Peter is going to say, I fucking hated this movie.
Again, I'm not saying I hated it, but I was bored out of my ever-loving mind. I was literally, I am sitting there, and it is playing at 1.5 times, and we're going to see if we can get a little Foley work here. Do you hear that noise?
I don't, but that doesn't always come through the Zoom call.
Damn it, Zoom, you piece of garbage. Basically, it was a slapping noise. And what that noise was that was me slapping my temple, because that is what I had to do to stay awake so that I could finish this movie.
So listeners,
please tell me why I am an uncultured swine, and
That's
what
not
it is
it.
about this movie that and here's the thing. I want to make this very clear. I could see that this was an incredibly stylized movie. There was a vision behind every scene in this movie. There were incomprehensible 5 minutes of cars driving through what I'm assuming is China or something based on the lettering of the sign. There we go, Japan. Like, there are cars driving, and it is like, I swear on my mother's life, it is like 5 minutes, and it is just awful, grating, screeching, over-exaggerated car noises, and then at times music, and it doesn't do anything. It is not progressing the story at all. All it is doing is literally fingers running down the chalkboard as I'm waiting for this scene to end. But I know that it's being done for a purpose, but I'm too stupid to figure out what that purpose is. And just so many scenes like that where I'm like, again, it is very clear to me that every scene, everything that's happening is done with a purpose and with intent. But it was so boring. Anyway.
That's fair.
Please.
That's fair. It is not. I'm going to say to anyone else who's listening, and this is also to you, I don't think that you're stupid. I don't think that you're uncultured. I don't think anything negative of you if you found this movie boring, stultifying, stupid, if you hated it. This is just a matter of like what appeals to you about cinema, what appeals to you about storytelling, and what doesn't. And like this is aesthetic choices. This is not one person being smarter than the other person. But like you said, everything is so carefully crafted. Every shot. There's so many shots that are just like 2 or 3 minutes long of a character like doing something in a room, and the camera will slowly follow them back and forth as they are doing whatever bullshit they're doing in that room. And there'll be 2-3 minute long single shots, which you just sit there and you're just like, how did they pull this off? That's not how movies work. That's not how movies work, especially not in the Soviet system where like And again, this is all shot on film. This is a thing that I feel like we don't think enough about as movie viewers. Film is expensive and you have a finite amount of it. Digital's not like that. You can always delete some old old takes and just retake to your heart's content. Film isn't like that. You have a set amount of film that you can film when you are making a movie. In fact, this movie was only supposed to be 2 hours and 25 minutes because that was how much film they gave him. But he squeezed some extra film out of it by that long car thing was a separate film stock. And it shows because it looks different. It looks alien. It looks weird. The shots of the planet itself, those were all done on a different film stock. And so all of these ways in order to like pad out this film to give it this sense of almost like suffocation and like paranoia, that is what the characters are also feeling, and that is what you feel as you're watching it. But it is like a stultifying suffocation. It is not like you are not like pushed into the corner really hard and you feel it. You feel like the emotions being sucked out of you by the space and by the amount of emptiness in this film. That is how I feel about this film.
Okay. I mean, I can see all of those things you're saying. And like I say, I do not want it to sound like I hated it, because I didn't hate it. I hate
It's
things.
so slow.
I hate things like Madam Web, where the execution just feels lazy and half-assed, and everything
Absolutely.
about it. The acting is half-assed. The story was half-assed. The directing is poo. You know, just like those are things I hate. Like this, I couldn't hate it because, again, I could tell that there was an incredible amount of intent to everything that was happening in it. It just was so slow, and there's so... Look, here's the thing, listener. If you haven't figured this out yet, because I didn't figure it out, quite honestly, until I had because I'm stupid again, until I had downloaded like 4 or 5 different versions, because there's only one place online to watch this. Now you can buy it, but I'm sorry, I wasn't going to buy it. Now you can see it on HBO or Max, whatever it's called now, which I have a subscription to. So I found it there. But at the same time, I was like, well, you know, I was going to be doing some travel 2 weeks ago. And so anyway, I downloaded a few versions, and every single one of these versions was in Russian with English subtitles, because that's the way the movie was. And I was slow and I didn't realize that. So once I cottoned on to that and figured out that that's what was going on, I'm like, okay, I understand now. I'm going to be watching this and reading the subtitles. And that's fine. I don't have a problem with subtitles. I'm one of those people who, when I'm alone, I will often just turn the subtitles on anyway, because I don't want to miss things. Mm-hmm. But when there are minutes, like large sections of time with no dialogue whatsoever, that was honestly where I found myself struggling to stay awake, because I'm not engaged with the movie at that point, because I didn't really care about what was happening. I mean, I understood, I get what was going on, but it just wasn't clicking with me. And so those long stretches of complete lack of conversation, those were the times where I'm like, my eyes are closing. And again, I'm like tapping myself on the temple, slightly more than a tap, to try and keep myself awake. And I'm like, I went and got a bowl on Thursday to stay awake. I got a bowl of frozen mango chunks from that I bought at Costco. And I'm like sticking these completely frozen mango chunks in my mouth so that it's cold and that it's like keeping me awake as I'm watching this movie. So again, I don't hate it, but it just, like, I bounced off it so hard.
That's fair. That's super fair. When it started and I got the vibe of it, I thought to myself, oh, this is a divisive film, isn't it? This is the kind of film that, like, there are certain people who are ride or die for it, and other people who are like, why does this exist? Why does anyone make this movie? I was really affected by it. I found it extremely affecting. But I can definitely see why you wouldn't have. I'm going to give a quick summary for listeners in case they are interested, but don't want to go watch a 2-hour, 46-minute film. Which fair, like I get it. I bought the Blu-ray from the Criterion Collection, and I'm happy to have this because this is the kind of movie that I'm just going to put on in the background of my life sometimes and just look over and be like, God, Andrei Tarkovsky just knew how to do it. Anyway, this movie is about Chris Kelvin, a psychologist who is sent to a space station called Solaris space station that is orbiting the planet Solaris. The thing about Solaris is that scientists have figured out, they think that there is a living entity on this planet and that the ocean itself that is covering the entire planet is a singular living entity. So they sent out a space station decades ago. It was supposed to be staffed by like 80 plus people. At this point, there are 3 people on it, and they're no longer answering any hails or anything. So they send Chris Kelvin, the psychologist, out there to see what is going on. He talks before going to this pilot named Burton, who had been out there, talked about the weird things that he had seen on the surface of the water of the planet before he came back. And then people thought he was just hallucinating. They send Kelvin out there. He finds that everything is in disarray. There's no one there to find him. He gets out of the pod that he's in, the rocket that he's in, and just like has to walk the hallways trying to find people. And everything's falling apart. The space station seems to be in complete disrepair. He finds out that one of the 3 remaining crew members, Dr. Gabarian, has killed himself hours before he arrived. And there's 2 surviving crewmen, Snout and Sartorius, who are both acting weird. And there's maybe a child in Sartorius's lab, and then he's like, come back later. And so Kelvin does the only thing that makes sense to him and makes no sense to me, goes to bed, and then wakes up and finds his wife, Hari, who died 10 years earlier, sitting in the room with him. This understandably freaks him out. So he takes her to the rocket room and says, we're going to get off the station together, shoves her in the rocket and shoots the rocket into space, and then goes back to bed.
After burning himself, setting himself on fire.
He does not get into the safe place for this, so he burns himself quite badly. Talks to Snout about it, who explains a little bit more about these things they call the guests, that are these creatures, people that appear, that apparently come from people's inner psyche, that the planet just is making appear for them. So Kelvin goes back to bed, wakes up in the morning, Hari's back. It's a different Hari, but Hari's back. And this time he's like, well, I guess you're here now. And like takes her and like starts living with her as if it is Hari again. She freaks out whenever he leaves her alone. She like really injures herself trying to escape the room she's in. And then her body miraculously heals. So Kelvin gets freaked out by that. And that's when the other 2 scientists explain, this Hari was created by the planet from your memories of her. So she is not a human, but she thinks and feels as if she were a human. And she begins to learn more, becomes a little more independent of Kelvin. She finds out what happened to the original Hari. What happened to the original Hari, Peter?
She committed suicide.
She died by suicide because Kelvin left her, because things were not going great in their relationship.
He doesn't sound like he was an asshole. Great guy. And,
No.
But I will give him credit for when he's having the conversation with Hari about this, he seems to recognize that he was the problem.
Yeah. So he's a bad partner. He leaves her. She dies by suicide. And then he's like, I lived my life for the next 10 years, but now you're back. This distresses Hari, but she continues living. They get together for Snout's birthday party, which turns into a philosophical argument between all of them. And Sartorius is a real asshole to Hari and reminds her that she's not a real human. So she kills herself again. She drinks liquid oxygen, but her body has miraculous healing powers. So then she comes back to life. in what looks to be a very painful, nasty experience, comes back to life. And the surface of the moon starts to or the surface of the planet Solaris starts to bubble and swirl and get weirder. After this, Kelvin gets sick and he starts having fever dreams about his mom. And when he wakes up, Hari has gone. Snout gives him her farewell note where she explained that she got the two scientists to destroy her. She didn't want to live anymore. And so, there was an earlier thing where Snout was like, we want to beam your brainwaves down to the planet because we think that'll make something happen. And Kelvin's like, I don't know about that. But apparently they just did it without asking him. And they're like, hey, ever since we beamed your brainwaves down to the planet, there's no visitors anymore. We're all just alone here. And so Kelvin is like, should I stay on the station? Should I go back to Earth? Should I stay on the station? Should I go back to Earth? I don't have anything here for me because he had committed to stay so he could be with Hari. But then he's like, I'm going to go back. Cut to him back home with his dad at their lake house. You know, he embraces his father, but weird stuff is happening. It's raining inside
weird water
the house.
inside the house.
Yeah. And he embraces his father. And then as it zooms out, you realize, no, he is on an island that has appeared on the ocean of Solaris. He is not, in fact, back on Earth. And that
something
is where the movie ends.
Snout had mentioned after,
Yes.
again, the beaming of the brainwaves, no more guests are appearing. Oh, and these weird islands
But
are
there's
popping
weird
up.
islands. And he turns out one of those weird islands is where Kelvin is now. And that's where we leave him. It's a weird, weird story. It deals with a lot of really big ideas about self and personhood and what does it mean to be a person. And I don't know. I just found it really compelling, but I definitely can see why it would be very boring to other people.
Yeah, it's a very interesting. Again, I will give it that. I will give it
And
that
there's just
word interesting, in that there are choices being made that I sat there watching them and going, huh, interesting.
And there's a lot of slow stuff. The set design is impeccable, but also weird. The hallway, the rounded hallway that's right in front of Sartorius's lab. Why does it have these weird rectangles sticking out of it at weird angles? Why are they sticking out of the ground? What is going on? Just really off-putting kind of alien architecture, even in this thing that was built by humans. So it's why is it this alien architecture? But the scene that really blew me away the most was there's a part right before Hari, alien Hari, dies by suicide again, or tries to die by suicide again, where Snout explains that there'll be a 30-second thing where they have to change the orbit of the station. So there'll be 30 seconds of weightlessness. And so there is this 30-second scene where Kelvin is having this conversation with Hari. She's been really distraught. She's been crying, but they're trying to comfort each other. And then all of a sudden, everything's floating. And the movie spends a minute of them in this room as they're clinging to each other and floating around. And, I'm sure they're doing it with wires and stuff. It's not one of those situations there are movies where they're doing weightlessness scenes where they get those funky airplanes that do.
Yeah, they did not go up in the vomit comet for this.
No, this is just strings and ropes and shit. But it is a convincing feeling of them in this weird extraterrestrial situation as they lose the weight. They lose hold of gravity, hold of reality, but cling to each other, that I was just good God, movies. I don't know. I thought it was really good. So thank you for humoring me and watching this movie, because I left this movie going, ding dang, did it again, Tarkovsky? I've seen 3 of your movies and it's 3 bangers. So, the guy had it. The guy had the juice. That's in my humble IMO. The guy had the juice.
There you go.
Is there any last thoughts you had on Solaris before we wrap on it?
I don't think so. I mean, I think I really kind of did mention, like you said, it was very much one of those, like, the best word I could think of in watching is I was like, oh, like this director, this dude, he's like one of those that I would hear smarter people than me use the word. He's an auteur, like,
Oh, he's absolutely an auteur.
very much. Again, as I said, I will give him full credit for the decision making, even if I don't like the end product. I fully respect that it was evident that he had a vision and he executed on that vision.
Yeah.
So I give total credit for that aspect of it.
Yeah. I think yeah. There's and the thing is he casts a very long shadow. This film, and specifically this director, cast a very long shadow. Because a lot of people would see his movies and then go on to make some really cool stuff that is far more publicly accessible. Like Mamoru Oshii, who is the director, we've watched one of his films, director of Ghost in the Shell, among many other things. It says that Tarkovsky is one of his biggest influences in terms of his like visual style and stuff like that. And once you see that, and then you think about Ghost in the Shell, you're like, yeah, there are a lot of shots that you can see might have been inspired by the type of shots that Tarkovsky does. It's just different when it's in a weird anime about the coolest cop to ever live, the Major.
Yeah, I can see that.
But yeah, it's I don't know. It casts a very long shadow, and in such a long shadow that, again, this movie was remade, ? There is an American version of it that, I'm curious about. I've never seen it. I tend to like Soderbergh, but to contrast, do you know Soderbergh? Do you know where he got his start?
Oh gosh, I cannot remember off the top of my head. It seems like it's going to be one of those. There you go. I was going to say, it's one of those things that I feel like as soon as you say it, I'm going to be like, oh, yeah.
This is a guy who made music videos. So, like, we have just spent, half an hour talking about how this 3-hour movie has a glacial pace, minutes long single shots, and all that sort of stuff. And then the sequel, or not the sequel, the remake was done by a guy who makes music videos. The guy who made the Ocean's 11 movies, the Ocean's trilogy. That's the guy who they tapped, or who tapped himself, I guess, to make a Solaris movie starring George Clooney. This is the movie they made right after they made Ocean's 11 together. They were like, hey, let's be friends and make Solaris. So I'm very curious to see in what ways does it try to be like the Tarkovsky Solaris? In which ways does it reject entirely the sorts of things that the Tarkovsky Solaris does? And like, how do the two jive with one another? In what ways? So I'd be very curious to see it.
Yeah, I am interested as well. Also, I'm excited about the fact that the Steven Soderbergh version is only an hour and like 36 minutes long.
Heyo.
99 minutes.
Yep, you know what? That's almost the perfect time for a movie. There's two perfect times for a movie: 82 minutes and 3 hours, and everything in between. Get in line.
Now, one thing I will say, again, haven't seen the 2002 version, but I was looking at the Wikipedia page, and I'm looking at the actor that they got to play. I don't know if she's still called Hari in this version.
Her name is Rhea in this version.
There we go. Rhea. There we go. And it was one of those who I'm like, why do I recognize her? Then I recognized her because she's like the kind of sort of girlfriend in the Truman Show, the not wife, but the other. But then the more I was looking at, as I'm watching the 1972 version, I'm like, did they intentionally get someone who's actually like looks kind of similar to the actor who was Hari in the 72 version? Like, it shouldn't look exactly the same, but as I'm looking at Hari, I'm going, yeah, like I can actually see the Natasha McElhone or McElhoney, I don't know how to say her last name. Anyway, I can see her and I'm like, huh, was it intentional that she looked sort of similar or was it just coincidental? I don't know, but I noticed
She's
that.
got the vibes. She's got a similar vibe to Hari. Anyway, we're gonna wrap the episode here. Thank you all for listening, and we hope to see you again in another couple weeks for another exciting episode of our podcast.
That
Feel
is
free
correct.
to give us a review or a star rating if you feel so inclined on your podcast platform of choice. If you have any questions you would like to send us or any comments or anything like that, you can always reach out to us at feedback@themiddleofculture.com, and we would love to answer those questions. And until next time, we'll talk to you then.
Bye.